Greetings. This is Caroline Staten with Transition US, and thank you so much for joining our online event today. Our principal aim in providing these teleseminars is to provide practical support to the leaders of transition initiatives, those who are considering starting a transition initiative in their community, and community leaders everywhere that are working on building resilience within their towns and their cities. And we'd like to continue to offer these at no cost, but do ask that you consider making a donation to transitionus.org. And thank you so much to those of you who have already done that, or those of you who are going to be doing that in the future. Really appreciate that. So without further ado, wanted to get us going here on this event today. This is building a more effective core team. And it's how to really build those structures that steward engagement and create spaces for strategic and inclusive work. And that's work without the tyranny, those barriers that stop us from moving forward. And we'll learn about principles and structures for planning, inviting, and working with core teams who oversee and host larger engagement projects. So without further ado, I wanted to introduce our guest today. Chris Corrigan is an art of hosting practitioner and has had more than 20 years experience working with participatory methodologies in Indigenous communities, Aboriginal organizations, nonprofits, and with government and business clients. He's worked with the transition town organizers in Canada and Ireland and has supported the use of open space technologies with several transition initiatives in North America. He lives on Bowen Island in British Columbia, and you can read more about his work and look at all of the resources that he has on his website at chriscorrigan.com. And all of this information is on our website tagged with this event today, so you can find it there as well. So Chris, thank you so much for joining us today, and I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Thank you. It's good to be back here with Transition US, and I think there's over 100 people on the call today, which is exciting to me. And I don't know how many of you know about Art of Hosting, or how many of you know about the core team stuff that I'm going to talk about. So I'm going to assume that you don't know all that much, and I'm going to start for some sort of first principles, which will be a good refresher for those of you that do know. And then we'll move on and do some bits and pieces and exercises. The art of hosting. The art of hosting is a set of practices that help us to become better participatory leaders. And it was founded. It's kind of sort of a movement, actually, global movement that was begun in the very late 1990s, the early part of the 2000s. With a bunch of people who were asking the question, what if learning was the new form of leadership that we needed now? What if in confronting the complexity in the world that we need, in the world that we're in, we require learning as our core function? And what if we built organizations that were just really all about learning? And what if we built within those organizations, what if our leadership practices were also about learning? And from that, the art of hosting came to be. And it's important, I think it's important to go back to these first principles because this kind of grounds a lot of the work that I do, but it also will ground a lot of what I'm talking about when we talk about core teams. So the art of hosting is predicated on a set of practices, 4 practices. These practices emerged from asking the question, if learning is the way to go about doing things, what is the best way to learn collectively? And of course that is through dialogue. That human beings have been doing this for 1 million years, gathering around a fire and talking about what they're confronting. And so the principles, some of the four good strong patterns and principles of good dialogue are that people in dialogue in dialogic settings are present, but they're not distracted. They're there for a clear purpose, so they're present and clear and curious. They also participate, so really good dialogue is participatory. They're also hosted, so there's some form of container, and that container can be something as simple as a question, or it could be a process or a method or a way of arriving at completing some work together. But they're hosted. And hosting can be also just a way of two people meeting and having a conversation. You just notice when you're in a conversation, you're in a container. There's two of you meeting. So a good conversation is hosted. And the fourth practice is that we co-create something. We create something together. So if we notice that if those patterns are alive in dialogue, then what would happen if we made them into leadership practices? And so the leadership practices of being present, of participating, of hosting others so that people's gifts can come forward, and of co-creating is the core of the art of hosting. That's really what the art of hosting is. And we find this practice, this fourfold practice, kind of expresses itself in a bunch of different ways. So one of the ways it expresses itself is through facilitating large group methods, such as World Cafe or Open Space or Appreciative Inquiry, or more intimate methods like Circle, and other methods that we've created in our community over time. These are all participatory methods, so they're very different from the kinds of typical sorts of facilitation that people do, where the facilitator is in charge of the conversation and runs the conversation. These are methods where the facilitation work is very much around holding containers. So that fourfold practice of leadership can show up that way, and the fourfold practice of participatory leadership can also show up in the different kinds of organizational structures and leadership that we engage in. And for me, the essence of core team work is that it comes from out of this fourfold practice, that a core team can also be present, can host itself, that a core team can also be participatory, that it can be a host, and that it can also co-create within organizations and within initiatives. So the core team practice, the practice of core teams, is like a collective leadership practice. If we imagine that the practice of being a facilitator in an art of hosting, or a facilitator, for example, in a World Cafe, is a form of kind of individual leadership practice. The core team practice, to me, is like the next level up. It's like what happens when a collective, when a group of people hosts together. The other thing I'll say about hosting, the art of hosting, is that you'll hear me use the words hosting and facilitation interchangeably, but there is a distinction to be made there. And although I don't, I used to say hosting versus facilitation, but now I just use the two terms. But I do want to make the distinction and point something out. The word facilitation is rooted in the Latin word facilitare, which means to make things easier. And I think anybody that knows me will know that it's not my job to make things easier. And I actually don't think it's the job of many of us confronting complexity to make things easier. In fact, making things easier is exactly how you ignore complexity. So one of the things, if you begin to look at the kinds of origin of the practice in the field of facilitation as a form of leadership, is that it comes very much out of a mechanistic worldview, which is based, of course, in scientific materialism and a view, like a kind of Newtonian view of the universe, which is that if we just push on the right things, we can get the right results. If we just know everything we need to know about the system, we can come up with the right kinds of answers for moving forward. And even our metaphors that we use in facilitation, using the word facilitation as a form of leadership, the metaphors we use are laden with those terms. Terms like making a meeting run more smoothly, making things, leveraging change, bringing our tools to the process. So there's all of these mechanistic kinds of metaphors we use when we're talking about facilitation and that kind of deterministic leadership, where if we just understood the whole system, the cause and effect stuff would be easy to manipulate. So we use the word hosting to kind of make a distinction that we're actually operating out of something a little bit different, that we're viewing complexity and especially human systems as living systems, that they're systems that are based on the principles of life and the principles of self-organization, and that they're really rooted in a complexity view. and did a teleseminar on this piece a year or so ago when we were looking at the Kniffen framework. So I think that's still archived. I know it's definitely archived on YouTube, so you can go in there and you can look a bit more in terms of how this particular worldview is important to understand the distinctions between a mechanistic cause and effect kind of worldview and a complex living systems kind of worldview. And it's important to kind of revisit that just for the moment, because the kind of core teamwork that I'm suggesting we do and the work that we've been doing for a number of years is rooted in that living systems way of doing things. So it's requiring not just a new set of tools and practices and things you can do, it's also requiring a new way of looking at organization and a new way of looking at the people that are around you. And this is sometimes the tricky part, well, more often than not the tricky part around implementing core teams, is that it requires us to both practice and see differently, and and I would say in most cases much differently than or more differently than we're accustomed to doing things in the way in which we're accustomed to leading. So here's the first exercise that I want you to do. So if you've got a pen and some paper in front of you, I'm going to give you a moment to draw a picture of a tree. Living system, draw a picture of a tree. That would be great. And just go ahead and do that. I'll give you a second.
I guess if people are driving or something, Chris, they could envision a tree, I suppose.
Yeah, you could breathe on your window and draw a tree in the vapor. So what I want to ask you, you've got your little doodle of a tree there, is probably many of you drew a tree with a trunk and kind of a canopy sort of leaf kind of thing, right? I'm willing to guess. And I'm wondering, what I'm actually wondering is if any of you drew a tree differently than that. And maybe could we do this, Carolyn? Could we put your hand up? How would you put your hand up?
You can press 1 on your keypad for those of you that are able to do that. If you drew a tree other than the trunk and leafed canopy version.
Yeah.
So just press 1 on your phone keypad.
And then Carolyn will activate your mic, and we'll get to hear what some of those other ways of directing.
Looks like there's at least 12 people so far. So let's hear from a few of you.
Yeah.
Jane, go ahead. Jane?
Hello? What do I press?
Oh, you're mic'd. Just let us know what kind of tree you drew.
What'd you draw?
Can you hear me?
Yes. What'd you draw?
I started with the root system.
Yep.
And then worked up through the stalk and the branches, and there were leaves, but there were other things. I'm not sure what they are. I think maybe.
Okay, great.
I was thinking. I was drawing.
Okay, cool. That's one way.
Jenny?
Yeah, the same thing. I started with the roots.
Okay, great.
Dale Brady?
Yes, I didn't start with the roots, but as I was doing it, I then spread the roots out along the ground like a maple tree. I didn't go too far into the earth, but I did that maple tree effect of being part of the earth.
Okay.
Did you want to hear a few more, Chris?
Maybe one more.
Okay. Claudia, go ahead.
Yes, I drew the roots. I also drew the ground that the tree is rooted in, and I also drew some branches that kind of went beyond other branches. They didn't fit the neat form.
Okay, cool. So I want you to draw a tree a different way from all of those different ways that you drew a tree, and I'll give you a clue about how to do this. This is how you draw a tree from the inside. So first of all, start by drawing a circle. It doesn't have to be a perfect circle, just a rough circle. In fact, if it's got a little kink in it, that's cool. So you draw a little circle, and then draw another circle around that one. And try and follow very closely the contour of the circle you've just drawn. And then around that one, draw another one. So what you're doing is you're drawing a tree from the inside out, right? So from the heartwood out over many, many layers. And this idea, if you keep doing it and you keep drawing many, many layers, you'll notice that the little kinks or the little lumps in your original circle get kind of accentuated over time. And so you end up with sort of a unique, what you're looking at is you're looking at a cross-section of a tree, and you're looking at a kind of a unique pattern. If you were to do it again and just draw like a circle-ish kind of thing and then closely follow the contours all the way out so that you're not smoothing them out too much, and you really do it slowly, you'll start to see that you get these beautiful, I think they're beautiful shapes. When I first started doing this, I was just drawing them for hours because they're always different. But there's a huge teaching in this for the way that core teams work. And that is, there's two big teachings. First of all, the shape of the core team, the shape of the heartwood of a tree or a branch determines its outer shape because everything hangs on that. In the work of a core team in an organizational setting or a community setting, what happens on the inside is reflected on what is built on top of that, on the outside. That's one thing. And the second big teaching for me about doing it this way is that we very often don't draw systems from inside. When we're asked to draw a system like a tree, we draw it from the outside, and we try and get all the bits and pieces, the roots in the ground and the interlocking canopy and the leaves in the trunk and all the bits and pieces. But that's kind of an outside view of the system. And it's just not our instinct to draw the system from inside. What does it look like on the inside of our system? But that's a fundamental view that's important to take when you're designing core teams, is you're not designing them from the outside, you're designing them from the inside. And beginning on the inside and moving out is a key distinction between planning a core team and creating, for example, a steering committee or an organizational structure and then filling it out. Most organizational development work in the world, very little organizational development work in the world takes this approach, I would say, of beginning on the inside and moving to the outside. But the reality is that in a living system, living systems proceed from inside to out. So, for example, a tree, when it, not being obvious here, but when a tree grows, it doesn't it doesn't fill out its final shape and then begin to live out what that would look like. It starts as a seed. In fact, it goes through a number of transformative moments, but each level of its becoming comes from inside. It unfolds. And whatever is on the inside, the sort of implicate order, becomes the explicate order, and becomes codified and becomes locked down and becomes a piece of the overall structure. That to me is like a key thing to understand when we're creating core teams, is that you're creating them in the moment, and you are. Not only are you creating them in the moment, but you're creating them constantly. And the core team shape and the life of an initiative will unfold from the inside. So I just want to challenge that. I want to drop that challenge in. It's a very different way of planning. Oftentimes we'll draw like the kind of organizational structures we want. We'll map stuff out. We'll take an external view of things, and I want you to understand that beginning on the inside is where we start with this kind of work. And the truth of it is that a lot of the issues and problems that we end up having in organizational settings come because of what's unfolding from the inside. Or as a friend of mine, Tim Mary, says, culture eats strategy for breakfast. So you can get outside of your work all the time, create a strategy, but if something else is coming up from inside and in the middle, then you're going to be in real trouble in terms of making that strategy go. So the first thing to know about core teams is that they are at the core And everything that grows in an initiative is going to grow out from that place. So I'm going to just pause there for a second and let you take that in. Core teams, the way we work with them is if it's true that we're beginning on the inside and we're moving out. There are a number of things that core teams do that are kind of unique to the team and a number of different kinds of functions. And I want to, I'm going to go over a bunch of these this morning so that you have a sense of some of the work that has to happen in terms of making a core team go. So some of these functions include, the main categories are like leadership, I would say organizational functions, and a kind of internal process that makes core team work different from the kind of work that you do in the rest of the time or in the rest of an organizational setting. Core teams originate, for me, around and continue to organize themselves around a center of shared purpose and shared work. So until there is a kind of shared understanding of the need and a shared understanding of purpose together, it's unlikely that a core team will ever come together. Typically, what I found in terms of starting up organizations, so for example, you could think of this in terms of transition committees or groups or other kinds of groups and organizations you've been involved in. They typically, what happens is that an individual somewhere has a longing, has something that just feels like needs to happen in the world, has a view, has a vision, has an idea, and cultivates that for quite a long time, looking for others that might share that idea. And when that idea when others do finally come around that idea, a shared sense of purpose, a shared intention, something they want to bring into the world together, there is an organizational form that just already takes shape. And what's at the center of that is the purpose, the shared purpose or the shared intention, and a shared understanding of the need. So lots of times I'll be sitting with people who, I can't tell you how often I have this conversation. Somebody will call me up and go, I have this great idea. I know what I need to do. All I need to do is I need to get like a World Cafe going or a big event going in order to let everybody know what my great idea is. And my first question to them is always, so who else shares this idea with you? And if they say nobody, then I'm really going to spend time backing them up. Because for a single individual to create a participatory process around a vision that they hold or around a purpose that they hold is really hollow. It's got a hollow kind of feeling, like it's a center that can't really hold. My recommendation to folks always is that they take time to discern with others what that need and purpose is, and to find others with whom that need and purpose is shared. If you can't share a need and a purpose together, then it's very difficult to initiate anything, especially in a complex system. And this is a trick for a lot of folks at the early stages of forming a core team. Core teams are often founded around an individual's strong longing. And one of the real tricks from moving from an individual cultivation of a great idea into a collective development of that great idea is being able to let go of that idea, to be able to release it into a commonly held center, and to release it into a social space between other people who can help make that become a reality. What makes that incredibly difficult is how vulnerable leaders are required to be in order to do that. A leader is absolutely required to let go of their preconceived notions about how things will unfold and to release into a collective holding. And you're going to do that at some point if you're going to create an initiative that's participatory. And it's much better to do that in a group of 2 or 3 or 4 people that are intimate with you, that understand you, that really get and share your purpose and a view of the need. It's much better to do it there than it is to do it in a group of 100 people that you're calling together to talk about what you feel strongly about. I've seen lots of initiatives go off the railing because we went really quickly to a large participatory process, and suddenly the people that really cared about what was going on lost their inspiration and lost their ability to really hang in with it because the group took it and ran with it. And that's not always a bad thing. I mean, it's not always a bad thing. But at the end of the day, it's not the way that we're going to be able to cultivate shared purpose over time, and it doesn't make actually for a very resilient or a very robust kind of way of operating. So the first thing to think about in terms of the purpose of a core team and what a core team needs to do is this internal piece around sharing the need and the purpose. If the need and the purpose are there, then they'll continue to radiate out around all of those concentric circles. If they're not there, then it's going to be very hollow. And a core team, I often advise core teams that your job is to continually come back to that shared need and purpose. There may be nobody else in your initiative over the next several years or the next several projects that happen that ever cares about what that shared purpose is, but right at the core of an initiative, the heartwood of a trunk of a tree, right, is constantly, well, in a tree it's not always alive, but the heartwood at the core of an initiative is alive. And it continues to influence the way in which the pattern evolves out from the center and the pattern emerges out from the center. And so a constant attending to that shared need and purpose is really, really important. For us, sometimes people don't have a lot of patience for that shared work. Like, why do we keep talking about purpose? But that's actually the function of the core team. The core team isn't tending to the shared purpose and the shared work at the center, then it's not able to really do the it's not doing its core team function. So another piece that's really important in terms of the internal dynamic of core teams is the idea that if what begins in that inner circle influences the shape of everything that comes out, then a commitment to practice on the inside is absolutely critical. So the core team has to practice with an integrity to the practice that it's expecting others to work with. So if it's engaging in a participatory practice, it needs to be doing those participatory practices on the inside. This seems elementary, but core teams are, and this kind of organizational development form is fractal. And although it seems elementary, I can't tell you the number of groups I work with who say one thing about how they want an initiative to unfold and practice completely differently in their core. And that dissonance that occurs there is often the place of the sort of fatal flaw in initiatives. The dissonance that's there can often turn into an issue around integrity or accountability or having leadership questioned. It's like, why are you expecting us to do this when you're doing that? One example I can give you is, for several years I was part of a core team that was working to decolonize the Indigenous Child and Family Services system on Vancouver Island in British Columbia. And it was a really significant project where we were trying to work to completely restructure the way in which child welfare was done in 53 Native communities up and down Vancouver Island. And our core organizing principle, we had a number of different things that were at our center and a number of different bits and pieces that we were doing, but our core organizing principle was, how do we transform the system so that we put children at the center? And children at the center became our kind of mantra. And we realized that we could practice this. It was a kind of an open principle. It's like, how does that show up in all kinds of different contexts? And for us, the way we used to practice it in our core team meetings was we would take pictures of our kids and put them in the middle of our meeting. It's a simple thing, right? But at every stage of our work, kids were always at our center, because that was what we were committing to doing, was building a system with kids at our center. And I remember one time going to a meeting with a number of chiefs in a community who were a little bit cynical about what we were up to. And we began, the core team was meeting with these guys, and we began the meeting hosting by saying, we just want to invite you to put your children at the center. And we all took out pictures of our kids or smartphones with our kids on them, and we laid them in the middle of our circle, and we said, this is where we're at. And the response was kind of shocking. One of the chiefs, who was cynical to begin with, turned to us and said, well, I don't have to put my kids at the center because they're always at the center of my heart and everything I do. And the implication being that if you have to be reminded that the kids are at the center, then there's something wrong with you. And it didn't put us off. We just said, well, we're going to do it anyway. And I have to say, it was like being committed to that practice of putting our kids in the center. It was all about our integrity. It was about not compromising on what it was that we were doing, and it was about finding at every level where we could do this. And it opened up, and in that moment illustrated a fundamental difference in the way we were committed to practicing child welfare reform versus the way some of our political leadership was willing to practice child welfare reform, which was to kind of make excuses about why you wouldn't be doing things like simple things. And there was a conversation that unfolded around that, which I thought was really important. So this is the second practice, I would say, is the one around commit to practice, and the integrity of your practice in the core team level will shake out all the way through all of the layers of initiative that you're engaged in doing. Your job as a core team is to build the container both within and between yourselves through dialogue, but also a container that is resilient and robust in the face of folks that challenge whether you have integrity in your practice. And I would say that two or three more principles around the internal piece. One of them would be that core teams, it's important that in your core team you're going to generate not only the strategy for an initiative, but also the culture of an initiative. So kind of laying on how this practice goes. The way you practice together is going to set the terms for how the culture of your initiative unfolds. And as I said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. So if it's important for you to tend to relationships, you have to tend to relationships within your core team. If it's important for you to adopt a leadership orientation that says that we're always going to be learning and we're not going to be afraid to fail, then you have to be practicing that learning and not afraid to fail within your core team. And the beauty of that is that you then become a lab for learning and demonstrating the resilience and robustness of this organizational structure. You become a lab. I often say that my family, for example, is a really great place for me to practice hosting. If I can't host well in my family, I mean, I learn a lot about myself hosting with my kids. I got two teenagers, 18 and 14 years old. I learn a lot about myself hosting with them. If I can't host there, then I have a hard time hosting anywhere else. But I also learn a lot about myself and a lot about my leadership practice here, just within the confines of working with my family. That comes out into my work all the time. And it's the same with core teamwork in the course of an initiative. You will notice that the patterns, the shadows, the hopes, the fears, the dreams, the limiting beliefs, all of what is embodied in your initiative is going to come up in your core team. And so you need to have good process and good practice for handling that, because these are the people that you trust the most. These are the people at the center of your work, and these are the people who share the purpose and share the need and share the work together. And so practicing dealing with those things there is a really great way to orient and to not orient yourself, but to develop your own ability to respond to those things as they take place outside in your initiative. So I want to be clear, like this internal work, this is the work of core teams. And in initiatives that were, say, transition initiatives or other kinds of projects that you're engaged in, this is what the core team work looks like. It's unique and it's internal to the 4 or 5 or 6 people or however big you are in the middle. Core teams are not big teams. They're small teams of trusted, intimate, and close-knit people. They meet often, and they do this work often. Now, there's other stuff to do as well. There's like functions, and there's bits and pieces of work, and there's also sort of various leadership practices. But I wanted to start with the origins of a core team, where you begin, how you begin together, and what your core practices are going to be, regardless of how you shake out. So I'm going to come to the other things in a bit, but I'm going to pause there for a moment, because that's quite a lot just to download onto you. And we'll get to some of the practical ways that core teams help to organize initiatives. But I wanted to just entertain maybe a couple of questions anybody has around what I've just been saying for the last 20 minutes or so. So just press 1 if you want to put your hand up, and Carolyn will take you in order, and we'll just maybe have a look at 2 or 3 questions, and then I'll move on.
So again, press 1 on your phone keypad. And George, I saw that you had pressed 1 some time ago. So let's go to you first, and then we'll hear from Priscilla.
I think that may have been an accident.
Okay. All right. So we'll catch you if you have another question later. And let's go to Priscilla. Priscilla, go ahead.
Yes, I'd like to understand what you mean by the term hosting.
Hosting versus facilitation?
Yes.
Well, like I say, I use the two terms interchangeably, but I think hosting for me is what happens when we create a container. Let me be esoteric for a second. Hosting for me is what happens when we create a container from inside the system. Facilitation is what happens when we believe we're creating a container from an external perspective. And that's a very crude distinction, and I don't want anybody to get hung up on like, oh, hosting is better than facilitate. It's just I use those two terms interchangeably, but I do use the term hosting to disrupt our traditional views of what a facilitator is. So a really easy way to put it would be the difference between a host and a facilitator is the difference between the mother of the bride and the wedding planner.
Great. Okay, thank you.
And then another question or comment from Tom. Go ahead. Tom Cockley, go ahead. We got you mic'd.
Can you
There
hear me?
Yes.
Hi, Tom.
Tom, did you have a question or comment?
Hello? Hello?
Yes. Please go ahead.
Maybe we should go on to another one.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So my question is that I know a lot of people, and how do I narrow it down to the core group who is going to be most helpful?
Great. Good question. So I think the first way of doing that is, for me, it's kind of what I do call a discernment process. If you are cultivating in yourself a longing and an intention to do something, it begins. My recommendation to people that are doing that before they get it out into the world broadly is to start going into a series of conversations with people trying to find people that share what they're doing with the level of enthusiasm and a level of inquisitiveness that matches what you're trying to do. I often say that core teams are a good place for skeptics, but not a great place for cynics. You don't want people really involved in a core team whose job is so cynical that they're going to undermine it. But it's a great place for skeptics to be there. It's a great place for people that get you at a certain level, that have a high degree of hope, but are also willing to challenge your thinking about how to do things. So it's a discernment process, which means that it depends on it's my favorite answer in complexity work. How do I know how many people or who they are? It actually depends. It depends on what you need. At the essence, though, I would begin a core team by finding one or two other people that share your purpose, even if their skill sets aren't exactly what you need at the moment, that share your purpose and are able to begin the process of networking to find others that might be close to the core to meet specific skill needs. But the first place I would start is with shared purpose, shared need, shared work, and a level and enthusiasm and commitment to that's shared by you.
And Chris, there's no other hands up at this time, so
okay, great.
Move right along.
So we'll move right along. So I'll talk a little bit more now about a core team's leadership functions, and I think that we distinguish a lot between a core team and a board. They can sometimes be the same things, but a board is like a core team with a specific governance role. So think about these core team leadership functions as being sort of high level, and I'm going to propose right now there's 3 of them. So your main functions are convening, inviting, and hosting. So Peter Block, who has written a great book called Community, The Structure of Belonging, which is, to me, essentially a handbook. It should be a handbook for the transition movement. It should be something that folks are looking at, especially if you're involved in other kinds of community work with municipalities, local towns, and that kind of stuff, and you wanting to disrupt some of the patterns of how we meet. Peter Block talks about one of the key conceptualizations we need to make in the world to create more participatory structures and to create places of more belonging is that we need to shift leadership into convening. So what does that mean? So convening is different from executing and doing. Convening means to bring people together. It means to help them come together. That's what convening means from the Latin of coming together. So you're coming together and discovering within the community itself what needs to be done. And the role of convening is a really critical piece. When we're working in a complex system, the kinds of practices we need, the kinds of things we need to do, and the kinds of ways we need to address complexity are emergent. And emergent ways of working and emergent ways of being come from actually getting out of the way and creating the containers to allow those things to emerge. So convening becomes a really, really important piece of the really important piece of the core team's work. It's different again from like steering committees or working groups who end up doing a lot of work themselves, and where you get people on board and you get people into task groups who have a specific skill set to be able to do a lot of work themselves. With a core team, over time, what you're going to be doing is you're going to be doing a lot of convening. You're going to be doing a lot of hosting conversations. You're going to be doing a lot of collective discernment. You're going to be doing a lot of collective meaning making. And you're going to be creating the conditions where people themselves can come and propose and plan and begin to implement stuff. So from a leadership perspective, it's really important that you have people on core teams who are understanding that this form of leadership is really it's critical. It's essential that the leader becomes a convener rather than the hero. So we sometimes talk about the shift as moving from hero to host. So it's not the leader's job to be in charge of those troops. It's the leader's job to be behind everybody, holding the rim of the circle and allowing for stuff to happen. In a participatory form, the reason we use core teams is because core teams are the group that convenes the work around them. The second function of a core team is to do inviting and to engage in invitation. For me, invitation is a verb, not a noun. So inviting is really the role. And in a participatory initiative, the core team's primary function is going to be to continue constantly inviting people into the shared purpose, into what it is we're trying to do, to invite diversity, to invite talent, to invite attention, to invite resources, to find all kinds of ways in which people can get hooked in and connected to and accelerate that work. So a core team's work is, and so understand this, is like where a board might have a role of communicating. Core team takes on a role of inviting for me. Communications is a part of that, but it's not a one-way broadcast. It's creating an interactive communication channel where I'm out there telling you what I'm doing and inviting you to become a part of it. And that inviting role is really important for core teams. If core teams aren't doing inviting, then they're not going to grow and they're not going to be able to create participatory initiatives. And finally, I think another key role in terms of the leadership approach of core teams is this role of hosting. And I do want to distinguish that it's very important that a core team sees themselves as being within the system they're trying to address. It's not easy to pretend that you're outside of the systems you're trying to change, and then to make change from there. And the reason for that is because we're just so deeply embedded inside that we just become invisible to all of the different ways that we participate in our own oppression, participate in the causes of the problems that we're trying to solve. It's really important for me that core teams working in a complex space and using participatory methods have a deep understanding of a complexity worldview that means that you're never hosting from outside the system. You're never trying to solve a problem you're not a part of, right? And so that's actually good news for me. I think my friend Adam Kahane uses the term, you can't be part of the solution if you're not part of the problem. So being part of the problem is a function, and especially if I think about transition work, we're all a part of the kinds of problems we're trying to solve. We all exacerbate them. We're all deeply embedded in them. We live in an interdependent and complex world, and as a result, there's no way we can't lead from inside. And this idea of leading from inside, of being a core team from inside the initiative that you're trying to do, of being inside the problem you're trying to address, this is a really key worldview, and there's lots and lots we can say on this. But it means that our leadership goes from essentially facilitating a solution to a problem to hosting the emergence of resilience from inside the system itself. And that's to me, that's a key. It's just a key piece, but it's a fundamental shift I've found in many organizations. So in other words, what it looks like is that lots of organizations that are set up to address problems will begin at the level of, let's do an analysis of our situation, let's do some research, that'll tell us the gaps that we need to address, then we can come up with strategies to fill those gaps, and once we've done that, then I don't know, we have peace and love and enlightenment, and we're all good, and we can move on and solve the next problem. And of course, in a complex system, and when you're building community and when you're building resilience, it's not how it works. You're never, if you're engaged in engagement, if you're engaged in community work and community building, you're never done that job. There's no finish line to that kind of work. You're always inside it. You're constantly adjusting. You're constantly creating the space in which, instead of doing a research and data analysis that will give you answers, the core team's work is to be able to host and convene people into meaning making together, into collective sensing of what it is we need to do, and trying things and creating a culture where things that we do or things that we try are safe to fail, where we can try numerous different kinds of experiments, and if they work, we find ways of supporting them, and if they don't work, then we find ways of abandoning them. And so this kind of triangle of convening and inviting and hosting is a sort of leadership profile that I invite core teams to show up in. Different kinds of large, and these aren't tools and practices so much as they are orientations to the work that needs to be done. So instead of being a hero, I'm a convener. Instead of communicating one way and having a PR plan, I'm actually inviting. And instead of solving problems from the outside, I'm actually hosting discernment from the inside. So I'm gonna leave that one there too, and just see if there's any questions related to that. The next piece I'm going to talk about talks about some of the more tactical and concrete ways that we can live those out. But are there any questions about that particular sort of leadership, collective leadership orientation? Just press 1 if you want to put your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. I think you can't talk about that enough, because it's a subtle shift, and it's such a big shift in our thinking. We have a couple of hands up. Let's go first to Christina. Go ahead.
Hi.
Hi.
I just wanted to ask you to repeat that thing you just said, because you were talking really fast, and that seemed really important. You said instead of being a hero, you're being a convener, and then I missed the next two.
Okay. Instead of being a one-way communicator doing public relations, you're being an inviter. So you're creating that two-way flow. You're inviting people in. And instead of being a problem solver outside the system, you're hosting collective discernment. You're seeing yourself as being inside the problem that you're trying to solve.
Okay, thank you.
I think you also said, Chris, instead of being a hero, being a host, which is
a
lovely phrase too.
Yeah.
Priscilla, go ahead.
Freeze came up with that. Mm-hmm.
Sorry, Chris, what did you say?
I think Meg Wheatley or Deborah Fries came up with that in their book about walking out and walking on.
Okay.
From hero to host. Priscilla.
Yes, I'm amazingly working on a problem right now as this teleseminar is going on, in which I'm trying to work through my community to invite some adults into a process. I'm working with high school interns on a project, but I have sort of a competing group that I've always had a problem with, that I think they're too much of what you're talking about. They're the board. And I think maybe some of my problem is I have a cultural difference with a lot of the adults in the community I'm in, that they tend to want to work more like the board approach as to what you're suggesting. And I have a natural inclination to what you're saying, and this is my dilemma. And and I'm finding myself saying, well, I need to go talk now to the president and vice president of our school board to get some support from them. And maybe it sounds like that's not a smart way to go.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think, this is one of the big problems, eh? Like, it would be so much easier if everybody was doing the same thing as we were doing. And I find that my world domination strategy usually works until I meet somebody else that has a different world domination strategy than me. One of the ways I would invite you to go talk to those guys is to, first of all, again, like, imagine you're all inside the problem, right? So when we're trying to do any kind of work that's complex, we really benefit from massive amounts of different approaches and different worldviews around it. And so it would be great for you to go and ask them how they could support you, and vice versa. To also ask them how you can support them, to understand what are they trying to do, what have they been running up against. And I find often, I mean, here's my big hope for you, is that the people that are on the board are highly constrained by the work that they're allowed to do, because boards operate under very strict terms of reference, governance things. And there may be lots of things they want to do that they can't do because of that form that they're in. That form that they're in as a board gives them a tremendous amount of strategic gravitas for them to be able to influence things that maybe you don't have if you're creating a core team that's looser and perhaps with less recognition in the community. So there is an opportunity for you to be able to create a conversation about how it is that we can work together to use the assets of both of our ways of organizing in order to do things. Core teams, at least when they initiate around an individual's view, don't have a great deal of strategic gravitas at the beginning. You have to go out and get that at a certain point. I'll talk about that in a few minutes. But I do think that if you can partner with people that understand what you're doing and you understand what they're doing, you can often find ways in which your work can complement each other. And if people are feeling like, oh, but we're competing with each other, then I would say that you just need to sit down and have a fundamental rethink of the way complex systems work. Because in complex systems, there's no such thing as redundancy. If people are addressing the same problem twice in two different ways, that's actually a feature of a complex system. Like, nobody walks into the forest behind my house and goes, why are there so many goddamn Douglas firs here? We've got 3 Douglas firs. How many more do we need? But we do say that all the time in social initiatives. We say that all the time. It's like, look, there's too many people working on early childhood, or there's too many people working on growing food. It's like, can you have too many people working on growing food? You can't, because you're going to learn immense amounts of stuff from all kinds of different people doing all kinds of different things. And that's why I say the role of the core team is to sort of convene and to host and, in that sense, connect people together so that you can create a space of learning rather than a space of competition and redundancy.
Great. Thank you.
All right.
Chris, there are a couple of other hands up. Did you want to take those now?
Yeah, let's hear a couple other ones, and then I'll get into function stuff.
Okay. So Denise, go ahead.
Hi. I was wondering what the name of the book was by Peter Block.
Yeah, the book's called Community, The Structure of Belonging. Fabulous book. Fabulous book.
And then we have Paula. Go ahead.
Hi. I have a question about enrolling community to expand the core team. And some folks coming in that are, are part of the Koch brothers army.
Oh, yeah.
Do you know what that means?
Yeah, I know what that means.
Yeah,
Saboteurs you're talking about. Yeah.
It seems as if, their mission is to stop things through obstruction or confusion.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm wondering if you have any experience with that and how to address people that are so emotionally charged and politically partisan.
Mm-hmm.
That are stirring up the community.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, yeah. I mean, it's yet another problem is that there are people in communities we just don't like. It's like I'm not sure if we've solved that one, But your first question actually takes me into the next piece that I want to talk about. But so I'll answer your second question first. So how do you deal with folks that are disruptive? How do you deal with folks that are not on board? How do you, or that are just outright trying to sabotage your effort in your work? So there's a whole bunch of different ways you can do that. One thing that's really interesting to me, and this is a deep practice that I've learned working in my own community here, is to actually sit down and really understand those people. I find, for one thing, creating a public forum where like public meetings, for example, where you have, people sitting at the front of the room and you have microphones and you have people yelling at each other. Those are awesome places to sabotage projects. So if you want to sabotage something that's going on, go to one of those meetings and just disrupt it. It's really, really easy. If you want to actually understand what a saboteur is up to, don't have those kinds of meetings. Okay, those kinds of meetings are ridiculous. You need to hear, my friend Christina Baldwin says, the shortest distance between two people is a story. And once I've heard your story, I might not like you, but I understand you, And I think the courage to be able to sit down and invite somebody into, what's going on for you? What do you see here? The truth of it is that, again, if you're doing real work around resiliency and addressing complex problems, you don't know where the answers are going to come from. And my challenge to all of us is that we might actually find the answers in our biggest enemy, right? But to dismiss defense because they're in an unresourceful emotional space is really difficult. So it takes time to sit down. It's an incredibly crunchy place to be. But honestly, if you can win over one or two people that are being funded by the Koch brothers, it's not how I pronounce their name, by the way, but one or two people that are being funded by those guys, then you can work with almost anybody. And so it's a good test for you as a leader to say, can I sit down and hear their story? And can I ask them questions that elicit their story, not their propaganda? Utah Phillips told me this great story one time where he was going to get cowboy songs from this dying cowboy, and as he was waiting to visit the cowboy, he looked at his bookshelves, and he saw on his bookshelves all these tracts from the John Birch Society, which is, ultra right-wing kind of quasi-Nazi organization, and he was really distraught because Utah Phillips, the folk singer, is an anarchist and communist and folk singer, and he and so he was really upset, and then he had this insight. He said, "Look, I'm going to hear this guy's songs, not his politics. Like, if I wanted to learn about his politics, I could just read these books." He didn't know anything about politics, which is why he has all these books. But he noticed that on the shelf there wasn't a single book of cowboy songs, right? And his conclusion from that was, if you ask people what they know about, they'll always tell you the truth, right? If you talk to people about what the stuff they know about, they're not going to tell you the truth. So my experience working with those kinds of people, and I have a lot of experience doing that, is sit down to them and talk to them about what's going on in their life. What's their story? What do they see? And if you're doing a transition town initiative and they're disrupting it because they don't believe that climate change is human caused, it doesn't matter, because bottom line, doing transition work is just community building. Just different name. Requires all sorts of people to be there, and we're not going to build resilient communities if we're going to take a bunch of Koch brothers funded people and put them on a reserve somewhere and say you can't play either. This is the courageous interaction one needs. So that's what I would say to that. But let me talk about engagement, because I've got 15 minutes or so left, and I want to talk about how you expand out your core team. Okay, so I'm going to move on. What I want to say is, again, with that pencil and paper or drawing on the steam on the window in your car, I'm going to get you this time to just, again, draw a set of concentric circles, 2 or 3 concentric circles. The first exercise I do when I'm working with a core team is I start to ask when we're, who else should be involved in the initiative that we're engaged in. And often what I'll do up on a wall is I'll draw a whole series of concentric circles like this. And what these concentric circles represent is different levels of connection to the core purpose of what we're doing. So that inner circle, right in the middle of that inner circle should be, sometimes I draw a heart. That's the heart of our initiative. It's the key piece that we all get on the core team that very few other people are going to get. And anybody on that inner ring is your core team These are people that are not going away anytime soon. They're absolutely committed to seeing this through for the long term, and they're willing to be in the particular core team functions that I talked about a little bit earlier. That's a really key group of people. Your next group of people out there, on the second ring out, these are people who you might say, you know what? They might say, yeah, thank you for inviting me onto the core team. I don't think I have the time to do that or the inclination necessarily to do that, but I'm totally interested to pick up a tool. I'm totally interested to pick up a shovel or to do the books or to do, to do something a little less frequently. I'm willing to get in there and work and support the work that you're doing at the core team. So I put those names on the second line out. The third line out, you might look at it and you might go, these are people who have said they want to be involved in what we're doing, but they can't commit to organizing it. So if we have big meetings, they're going to come to those meetings. They'll help us get the word out. They might even be willing to, do some work at our meeting, volunteering at community meetings or doing a little bit of extra work. On your next row out, the fourth row out, you might have people then that are like, these are folks for whom our work matters. They want to hear from us. They want to be involved with us, but they're likely to we're likely maybe only to see them once or twice a year. All right, and then you can continue to go out. And so what you have is a set of containers all related around that core piece. And the exercise I usually go through when I'm thinking about expanding things, when it's time for the core team to get some stuff done, is we'll just sit there and we'll take a Post-it note and we'll put a name and a phone number on that Post-it note. And we'll do that with hundreds of Post-it notes with all the people that we know, and we'll build our network that way. And we'll map them on that concentric circles. The reason for mapping them on the concentric circles is, I think my friend Jeff Aiken's on the phone call today, so I'm going to use a baseball metaphor, is it's like at the core team level, you've got your major league team. These folks are all in, and they're doing all of the work. The next level out, that's like your AAA team, and then your AA team and your single A team. Like the likelihood of people from the single A team jumping right into the core team is really, really low, but there's a strong likelihood that people from AAA might make it to the core team, and vice versa. And what this gives you is it gives you a way of being able to relate to and expand your work to people in differing ways. So the way you as a core team talk to folks that are way out there on the fourth or fifth ring is going to be way different from the way you keep people on that next ring really close to you. And as a leadership practice, this is actually really important because the folks that are close in, those guys at any time could be possibly core team members. If they feel like their commitment is such that they want to step it up a notch, it's really easy for them to get involved with the core team because they've been close in, you've been keeping them involved, you know what they're able to offer, and they are relatively familiar with the work that you've been doing. Likewise, if you have a core team member that has a baby or something and just can't continue on, she can go to that second ring out instead of going all the way into the sort of undifferentiated heap of the public. So if you imagine that the rings you've drawn are not so much like a target, but are contours on a map with the small ring at the top and the outer ring being at the bottom, then what you have is kind of like, this is what I call like the volcano shape of engagement. In other words, know where people are and invite them to move back and forth between rings, and it's much easier for you to engage people if you have this kind of gradiated way of participating. Okay? So one of the ways that you can, just looking at my time here, one of the ways that you can make good use of those rings is by identifying also people's skills, what they're able to do, what they're able to bring, and do that in relation to what you need. So for example, if as a core team you decide that you're going to raise money and support projects in the community, and that's going to be one of your jobs. So you're like creating a little foundation. You're going to host meetings, raise money, create innovation, and support work in the community. Then you need an infrastructure for fundraising. You need an infrastructure for the kind of communication that goes with fundraising. You need an infrastructure for being able to distribute funds. You need a way of being able to host gatherings, do innovation. So you have your list of things that you need to do. This would be called a strategic plan. And you can organize yourself in a bunch of different ways, right? You can organize yourself in a bunch of different ways. So as long as there's one person on the core team who's sort of like responsible for fundraising, you can draw on your network from the other circles. You can make good use of people's time. So if somebody's on the third circle out and they're saying, you know, don't contact me for anything, but if you need help fundraising, I'm there, then that person immediately gets put on the little fundraising team. And the person on the core team can be the point person. We often draw a triangle out across many different levels. So if I'm working with, if you look at some of the core team stuff on the Art of Hosting websites, you'll see images of these concentric circles with triangles drawn on them. Those triangles represent a use of a kind of a deployment of hierarchy. So it's a really useful way of having somebody who's on the core team taking responsibility for part of the initiative, and then enlisting folks at various levels who can put in as much time and energy as they can into something, but that it all comes back into the core team piece at the end of the day. So it's a form of communicating and, dare I would say, a form of accountability for the work that gets done. So you can build a network really quickly this way. And if you start to identify the folks that are interested in your initiative, and then you start to kind of cross-reference them against the things that the core team needs to do in order to express its purpose in the world, which again I would call a strategic plan, then you can be engaging folks very precisely and in a way, and very differently. So it's not a one-size-fits-all. If you're doing a one-size-fits-all kind of approach to outreach, then you're really missing the opportunity to develop capacity, to work with people given their gifts and talents, and to work with them at the level that they've said they're willing to work with you as well. So those are that's one of the key ways that I help working with core teams, that I help them organize. It's not putting you at the top of a pyramid, but it sometimes is putting some of your people at the top of the pyramid. It's not creating an overwhelming amount of bureaucracy, but it's sometimes creating enough bureaucracy that you can track funds, for example. It's not creating a broadcast communications network, but it's creating enough of a communications plan that you're able to engage and listen to and discern what people are up to, and you know how to reach certain people because they're on a certain ring, and that ring is determined by its proximity to you. So we're using the structure of a tree organizing from the inside out as a way of doing that. So let me stop there and see if there's any other questions. God, there's so much more we could talk about, but I'll stop there and see if there's any questions about that way of organizing and reaching out.
So press 1 on your keypad if you do, and I'm just thinking there is so much. I know you could say so much more, Chris. We're going to have to do this again.
Yeah.
Let's hear from Ruth. Go ahead, Ruth. Ruth? You know, unfortunately, Ruth, the sound isn't very good. We'll have to go to someone else. Tom, go ahead.
Okay, so another issue is what I want to do is obviously start a transition in our town of Doylestown, but yet I know some people that would be really good that don't live right in Doylestown. So do my core members, I mean, I would think the core members should be coming from Doylestown, but I don't know how to discern between the two.
Well, that's just a distinction you get to make. You know, you can say our core team needs to be people from Doylestown, or you can say our core team needs to be made up of people that know how to set up a transition initiative. In which case, they don't need to be from Doylestown. I think that's entirely based on, I think that's just a choice you get to make, really. And it's a strategic choice for you, you know? I mean, if there are people outside of the town that are really interested in getting involved, then, you know, limiting it to just people who live in the town seems really arbitrary to me.
And let's see. We just have Ruth. Ruth, I'm going to give you another try here. Work.
She's on the UFO. I'm not sure.
So if you have any other comments or questions, now's the time. And I don't see anybody else putting their hand.
So while we're
here's
all right,
one other person.
So maybe I'll. Is there another person there, Caroline?
There's Priscilla. Priscilla, go ahead, and then we'll ask Chris for your closing thoughts and move on to our day. Priscilla.
Yeah, I want to thank you for this. You've given a real. I love the fact that you've put the organizational work in the form of a tree. It's so clear and refreshing, and it's a great metaphor to help visualize how this work can really move forward. And it's giving me a whole new perspective on a current dilemma I'm coping with. So I really appreciate it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you for that.
Nathan just popped in with a question. Go ahead, Nathan. Just under the wire. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. I just want to know if you feel like that there is a value in core team members not only focusing so much on that which they want to create, but possibly taking the time to know each other and to experience building a trust out of that kind of knowing.
Oh yeah, I mean, if I didn't say that strongly enough, I'm happy to underline it again right now. That is the work of the core team, is to build that relationship and build that relational field. You need at the core of work, when you're trying to work on problems that you don't know the answers to, at the core of that is trust. If you don't have trust in that relationship, then you're not well set up to do this kind of work. So the checking in with each other, the hanging out, I mean, friendship is a key pillar in this work. And so, yes, absolutely underscore that.
Well, thank you, Chris. This has been great, and I, again, would love to have you join us and even dive deeper into all of the things that you're that you have to share for all of us that are working in teams of people. So just thank you, and just some closing thoughts from you.
Great, thanks. Well, there's lots more you can learn about this stuff through the Art of Hosting community. Carolyn gave you my website earlier, chriscorrigan.com. There's a number of links that I have that I'm going to send to Carolyn, and you can maybe send it out to everybody as well, that are just particular blog posts that I've written about over the years that maybe go into some of this stuff a little bit deeper. And then I just invite you, if you're interested in learning this stuff, if you've got some experience running participatory processes, we have 2 Art of Hosting Beyond the Basics events coming up where we're really looking at actually this practice of core teams in systemic work, and those are going to be, there's one coming up in May in Minnesota, there's another one in Kingston, Ontario in October, and we're doing one in England in July. And you can find out more about that at aohbtb.com. And for those of you that want to try some basic Art of Hosting stuff, and if you're working at all around water issues, we're doing 2 Art of Hosting water dialogues meeting through an organization called Waterlution, which is a Canadian social enterprise that facilitates dialogue around water issues, intersectoral dialogue. And those are coming up real soon. We've got one near Vancouver, April 20th to the 22nd, and one near Toronto, April 27th to the 29th. And you can find out more about those at waterlution.org, waterlution.org. So lots of other places to learn, and I'm always up for an email. And you can follow me on Twitter as well at Chris Corrigan, where a lot of links and stuff come out from time to time. So thanks for the time, Carolyn.
Yeah, thank you so much.